When A.W. Tillinghast finished building San Antonio's Breckenridge Municipal Golf Course in 1916, he couldn't have known that he left behind a major battlefield.
The whole Shootin' match, a history of the La Cantera Texas Open, is sponsored in part by Sprint, the San Antonio Convention and Visitors Bureau, and the San Antonio Golf Association.
"80 years ago, many professional golfers could neither read nor write, and were better at pulling nut grass and loaded wheelbarrows than they were at using the appropriate fork at dinner. Most of them had hands as rough as the bark of an old cedar tree, usually from rubbing the rust off their club heads.
The PGA of America was founded in 1916 for a lot of reasons, one of which was the pros felt they had no control over their lives. They had no control over the country clubs because those were controlled by blue bloods from the East Coast.
In those days, the golf professionals didn't go into the clubhouse. They didn't go into the front of the clubhouse at all. Sometimes they let them go into the back.
There were only 4 tournaments for professionals. They were largely under the thumb of Eastern amateurs who were very well educated and very rich. While most golf professionals were blue-collar workers, many of them were immigrants. There would probably have been a winter tour sooner or later. It just so happened that it started in San Antonio. Along about 1919, there was a fantastic college athlete named John Bredemus.
Well, John Bredemus was quite a character. He's one of the finest athletes in the United States.
In 1913, he competed against the great Jim Thorpe in the National AAU all-around.
He's the one that beat John Bredemus out of quite a few first places.
But when Thorpe's medals were taken away from him, they were given to Bredemus.
He worked as an assistant pro at the OBrien in the summer of 1919, and it was there that he made the acquaintance of the infamous Jack OBrien. As the sports editor of the San Antonio Evening News, OBrien knew the terrain and had access to the Alamo City's leaders. He was brash, sometimes abrasive, and hugely successful at getting what he wanted. Under the pen name Job, he ran a one-man editorial campaign to make people see that golf was a major means to attract people to the Alamo City, that the city already had the only 18-hole municipal course in Texas and one of the finest ones in the country at Breckenridge Park, designed by the renowned A.W. Tillinghast, and further that the course deserved an impressive new golf clubhouse to go with it. If you agreed with this outlook, you were, in his words, a far-seeing, alert, public-spirited citizen. And if you didn't, you were a ranting gink with an abridged think tank. The idea that both Bredemus and OBrien shared was a golf tournament, one held in the middle of winter to demonstrate San Antonio's ideal weather, and one that would raise eyebrows by offering more prize money than the U.S. Open.
Purse was $5,000. That was the biggest big money tournament in the United States, as far as I know. For instance, the National Open, if you won that, you only received $500.
By November 1921, several patrons had bought into the plan, and golf professionals, they were definitely interested. Bob McDonald, Clarence Mangum, and over 60 others showed up to compete in the first tournament, held the first week of February 1922 at the Breckenridge Park Municipal Golf Course. At the halfway point of the tournament, deliberate Cyril Walker held the lead with 138, and Bob McDonald, the father of the modern stance, was a shot back. Paddy Doyle, already well on his way to becoming a folk hero, was further back at 158. In between Friday and Saturday's rounds, Bredemus appealed to the mayor and council for sand to spot patch the muddy areas laid bare by the increasing golf frenzy at the Breckenridge Golf Course. And Jack OBrien? His headline riders were in seventh heaven. The press touted the first tournament nationwide for its enormous prize money.
In that first tournament, they didn't quite have $5,000 altogether, so Bill Furlow would pass the hat around into the gallery during this whole procedure.
In front of a gallery that eventually numbered 6,000 golf fans, Bob McDonald, the Scotsman from Chicago, won the first event and walked off with the first prize of over $1,600.
I was sitting at the green when McDonald came in. She two-putted, as I recall, the last hole to take the lead. Sorrel Walker hit his tee shot a little to the right of the fairway, but still in good position. And he walked all the way up to the green to see where that pin was and what he had to do to try to get a 3, because he needed a 3, a birdie, to tie McDonald. Well, he went back, hit his ball, and he didn't get the birdie.
By the end of that first tournament, San Antonio had gotten an incredible amount of publicity, and it was clear that the winter tour had been born. In 1923, the total purse for the Texas Open was an unheard of $7,000. That was the year that Walter Hagen came from 6 shots back on the final day, then captured first place in a playoff.
Sir Walter Hagen missed the first Texas Open, but he made up for his mistake by coming to the second one. Walter Hagen did something that was probably not ever imagined, and that was he came from behind in a tournament to win the 1923 Texas Open. They were playing on golf courses that weren't manicured. To come from 6 shots back, unlikely. Hagen was a real snappy dresser. Hagen was one of the first to wear oddball color combinations, purple socks and orange pants, or orange socks and purple pants.
Here came Hagen in his limousine. He was already about 15 minutes late for starting time, which today would have either disqualified him or put a 2-stroke penalty on him, you know, but he pulled up, the chauffeur driving this limousine. The chauffeur opens the door. Of course, I'm standing there kind of catching all of this, you know, I'm just a kid. And Hagen steps out and takes off his ascot, takes off his coat, gives it to the chauffeur. The chauffeur folds it up, puts it back in the limousine. And Hagen said, now let's see, with whom do I play today? he was really a fine fellow, but that was what he had to say.
During the mid-1920s, golf in Texas was on a roll, with both public and private courses blooming throughout the state.
Even with the explosion that was going on in golf in 1925, Jack O'Brien had a terrible time raising money. And I think that's where the hat passing started. The San Antonio Golf Association was also formed. O'Brien was under fire from the USGA about the size of the purse, and at the same time, the pros were on his case because they wanted that purse raised. So he was being pulled in 2 different directions. Jack O'Brien and John Bredemus had to be taken away from the sport and projected on the biggest problem they had, which was raising money every year.
In 1926, for the first time, bad weather dictated that the final round be played on Sunday.
Wild Bill Melhorn was a bricklayer before he was a professional golfer. As you might imagine, he wasn't the most finely tuned human being you probably ever met, and they didn't call him wild for nothing. When Bobby Cruikshank came to the green, he had a putt to tie for the lead in the Texas Open.
Melhorn had finished playing, and he had climbed into a tree right there by the clubhouse, in the fork of a tree, so he could see over the crowd and all. Everybody was getting up as high as they could.
At the most inappropriate time possible, Bill Melhorn is said to have hollered,
"What do you know about machinery?"
At that moment, Bobby Cruikshank missed his putt, hitting the worst yank pull of his career. Jack O'Brien became furious. Bobby Cruikshank became despondent. Melhorn was contrite, and Max Smith won his 2nd Texas Open.
Because Melhorn was in the tree there, everybody looked around, they thought he was the one, and he was the one that was discredited with having said it all that. So I asked him, I said, "Bill, what about that 18th hole? Did you really make that remark?" And he said, "No." He said, "I absolutely didn't do it." We all know some of the pros know, and we talked about it later on. We weren't going to say anything about who did do it because he was a prominent person there, see.
By 1927, sculptor Kutson Borglum, who would later design Mount Rushmore, was in residence in a converted stone building next to Old Brack's clubhouse, working on a small model of his old trail driver's monument for the state. Old Brack needed some work too, and so it was decreed that the Texas Open should be played at the new Willow Springs course while Bredemus did a facelift on Brack. In 1928, an infamous Blue Norther blew in.
Willow Springs Golf Course was and is a great track. The weather turned awful. miserable conditions. The golf course then became not so much a test as it was a nightmare.
Tommy Armour and other players used the time to incorporate the Professional Touring Golfers Association in San Antonio. It was this organization that was to evolve into the modern-day PGA Tour.
By 1929, the professional golfers were once again looking for more control over the system that had been created that was professional golf. They decided that 10% of all purses for all tournaments should be devoted to the playing professional's office, which was essentially Tommy Armour's. The individual communities were no longer going to have real control over their tournaments. By 1929, I'm sure Jack O'Brien and John Breedemus wondered why this beautiful thing that they had created in San Antonio had now turned against them. But I have to believe that there was a pocket of sadness in both men for what had been a wonderful beginning.
In 1930, with the Texas Open back at Brackenridge, a young player from Fort Worth showed up. At 17 years of age, he was making the Texas Open his first professional golf tournament.
Ben Hogan's first experience with the Texas Open was not good.